Welcome to Who Are You, a CSI podcast. I am Lauren, and I've seen CSI through and through around 3 to 4 times.
And I'm Nick. These are my first time experiencing these episodes.
And today we are reviewing Season 3, Episode 6, The Execution of Catherine Willows. Original air date is November 7th, 2002. Director is Kenneth Fink. Writers are Anthony E. Zeiker, Carol Mendelsohn, and Elizabeth Devine. We begin today's episode the way that we begin many of an episode, with shots of the Vegas Strip. So Nick, before we continue, what is our Vegas score for today's episode?
It's not bad. It's 32.
Okay.
It's pretty.
We were like 22 last episode, 23.
Yeah. We've been kind of low. We had some. That's kind of where we were early on in the season. I mean, we're still pretty early in the season, but we really nailed down this intermediary 3-second shot between scenes. You get we're getting less time up front, fewer scenes up front, and more sort of like transitional shots.
Transitional scenes, yes. So we go from a few shots of the Vegas Strip to a prison. We see a man being prepped to be executed. He then is executed. So
yeah, I guess that my understanding is they put in the drug that stops his heart.
Yeah, and
then they brought him back to life.
Yes.
All right.
But before we move to the next scene, you have a spot the guest star here, don't you?
Yes. In my notes is execution room attendee.
Yeah, we'll find out her character's name later.
They do end up having a role many minutes later. I was kind of like, what happened? They're also she's also credited in the credits, which double confirmed. Like I had a very quick confirmation that it was who I thought it was. Is Viola Davis, Academy Award winning, and I learned EGOT winning. So Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony winner Viola Davis, who I would say, like, to me, I think the biggest thing the biggest thing that I'd put her in is the movie The Help, which is like crazy good movie, and really like for me, I think one of those movies that's like really introspectively forces you to feel like how awful the universe can be sometimes. But also in a bunch of movies recently, and is in some, not Marvel but the other people, DC superhero stuff.
Yes.
And so lots of things going on. Viola Davis, hopefully you know who she is. There are some shows that she's been in for like stints that I've not watched this movie. So
okay. Yeah, I mean she has a pretty solid IMDb list.
She did play Michelle Obama in something.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
There's something called the TV series called The First Lady that came out not that many years ago, and she played Michelle Obama, and I was like, I didn't know this thing existed.
Yeah, I didn't know that existed either. Well, good to know. Yeah, her IMDb is very impressive. She has quite a listing here. So I mean, we get a little bit more details about this later, but from what we learn later and a bit of what we see in this scene, it seems that he was given the drugs to end his life, but then a call comes in, he gets a stay of execution, they revive him. We then have the first, and by the time I was like, oh, I should keep count of this, I think it was already too far gone. But we get the first of many a walk and talk. There are many walk and talks in this episode. I was like, walk and talk. They're walking and talking. So
I'll see if I can keep count as we go.
Yeah.
This is one.
Catherine and Grissom walk and talk. This is where Catherine's letting him know that there was a stay of execution, and Grissom doesn't know what she's talking about. And so she has to fill him in that it's the John Mathers case, serial killer, 3 college students. She doesn't think that the DNA is going to change the outcome of the case, and this will thread its way through the entire episode, this is her first case that has made it this far regarding execution.
Grissom does honestly, no, he does a good job initially sort of asking the question, checking in. Is this your first time? How are you doing? Then she dodges the question a little, and then it gets really gristmy at the end of the season. Scene, so he sort of does like a 180. I was like, oh, I'm so proud of you. Now I'm not.
Yeah, but at this point, she's telling Grissom that she isn't sure how she feels. She's not sure how she feels about it, which I think is an understandable reaction. We go to credits. We return to Jim Brass, Sara, and Grissom at a house. There is a very intoxicated man, like, sitting on the curb. He's wearing a shirt. It's covered in blood.
This is the second spot the guest star for me.
Spot the guest star.
So this is Wade Williams, who, here's the thing. I saw this scene, and they're on his face for a long time.
They are. He's like just sitting on the curb, and they're really up in his business for a bit.
I know who this guy is. In my head, I was like, this is just the guy who plays like the asshole cop in like everything. And when I looked at his IMDb, I basically confirmed that.
Yeah, you were like, oh, that's true. That's
I was trying to find it, and I couldn't. I think there's a Venom movie. He's in the Venom movie trailer, and that's like a recent thing he's in, where he's like, I think he gets eaten, or it's like it's one of those things where he's like a pain where he's like an asshole to the protagonist, and then
something bad happens,
and then and then Venom eats him later on or something, right?
Or
beats him up or something, and part of me thinks, I wonder if that's why that thought started in my mind. But this is a show I've talked about a lot that I'm 90% certain I've only ever watched the first season of, or maybe 2 seasons of, is Prison Break.
I was going to say, he was in 62 episodes of Prison Break.
Yeah, he's a guard in there too, so it sort of reinforced that same thing. And he's a bunch of stuff where he's like one episode it's Officer This, or something like that. So yeah, he does that a lot, but it's like he's not actually in anything that big. He doesn't I have a big role. He's in a lot of big things.
He does a lot of voice acting, and so
I did that too.
I didn't recognize his voice, but I have seen a lot of the animated shows that he's been in Avatar, and he's been in like several Batman series, and he's been in, there was like something else that he was a voice actor, and then I was like, oh yeah, I definitely watched that. So I guess I've heard him a lot.
They do start out Fast and Furious, but this is actually my last spot to guest star. So.
Oh, okay. Wow, we're getting them out early today.
I was like, I thought I was gonna have another 4. We had one episode where we had 4 or 5 ones.
I think 5. I think
we had 5. I had 3,
highest.
and you had 3, and then there was like some non-overlap. But yeah, he's just in a bunch of stuff. And for as much voice acting as in, you had to see him in an episode of Critical Role. Yeah.
I know.
They
didn't bring him in.
Again, I don't know what he's like as a human being. So you may not want to hang out and play nerdy games.
Yeah, they might not want to. So he is intoxicated. He's like covered in blood, and we're learning that they're not there because of that. They're technically there because his daughter is missing. His daughter didn't show up for work, and so people at her job called her and is missing. And he's claiming at this time that the blood on his shirt is from like a bar brawl.
Yep.
So we're definitely going to dig into this a little bit deeper. So in that vein, we're with Nick and Grissom. They're inside the home. Nick tries to say, oh, it's like a pigsty in here. And Grissom's like, don't be mean to pigs. Pigs are very clean animals. Like, don't put this on pigs. Like, this is human behavior here.
You've never seen a pig shop at Walmart and then accumulate a bunch of cheap things over the years.
Yeah, no, they don't do that. So they continue through the house. They end up in the daughter's room. The daughter's room is entirely different. The daughter's room is like pristine and everything's in order and it's very clean. But she does have deadbolts on the door, which is
her own fridge with healthy food.
Yeah, she has her own fridge. They learn that she's a black belt. They pull, the uniform and the belt from her.
Great look on Grissom's face after finding the black belt in the closet, like making a comment about like self-defense, right? They're really giving this idea of like broken home.
Yeah.
It's
she needed to
it was very uneasy for me to watch, actually. It was kind of weird. I was like, this is something I'm sensitive from having a lot of friends growing up in bad situations.
Yeah.
And stuff that like, it's like people, it's important because it sort of sets this tone to something that is going to come up later about, how quickly somebody might want to try to get out of a situation like that.
Yes. Grissom also finds a blood-spotted towel.
Yeah. I thought it was a bathrobe the first time I watched it. And then they clearly call it a towel many times. I was like, I don't know what I thought.
Yeah, it's all right. Our brains operate in funny, weird ways sometimes. We are back with Catherine. She's looking over the previous crime scene photos. We see like a reenactment of the former crime. Warwick enters. We learn that the original case was from like 15 years ago. Like that's when Catherine worked on it. And that the victim is Charlene Roth. And they have, as they do, here and there throughout this episode, they have a conversation about like pro or against the death penalty.
Yep.
And Warwick is saying that he's pro if they did it, but he's, not super, he's wary of the composition
I
of.
forget exactly what he says, but the implication is that it's not exactly racially fair.
Right. Yes. And Catherine at this point is still kind of saying that she doesn't really know. She tries not to think about it too much. She hasn't really made a decision one way or the other. Then we have number 2 walk and talk.
Yep.
So Greg Sanders and Catherine have a walk and talk. And we learn that the samples from the original case have to go to like an outside DNA expert. So they can't be processed in house. They have to be processed by the feds. So
boy, do I have thoughts on this
okay.
DNA processing facility.
So we get our first of several videos of the DNA lab. Just like random, like sample being received and sample being brought into lab.
Yeah, it has to be like 8 to 10 times. So this episode,
a lot. I didn't mark them all down because at some point I was like, this is just going to take too long to call these out every single time.
They show a faceless worker in a lab processing a sample, and every time it's like typewriter font on the screen, FBI labs or Norfolk, Virginia, or whatever.
It definitely had X-Files vibes.
Mitochondrial DNA processing facility, over and over and over and over, and there's no talking, and they're just doing stuff. They're just doing pipetting here. And then honestly, it really wasn't a dramatic reveal, or like when we get there, it's not irrelevant, but it's like,
I would say it's pertinent.
Yeah, but it's just like, what was you trying to make it sound like there's some sort of high stakes race against the clock? I don't know. There unnecessary tension. If we're giving FBI mitochondrial DNA scores, it would be off of the charts for the number of scenes and seconds.
I agree.
I would rather have had 10 more seconds of Las Vegas.
I don't think I can argue that. I think that's pretty safe.
Yeah, I was weird. I just, in that, again, in hyping it up with Greg here, it's like, oh, you send it out there. It's like, I don't know. I just thought they were gonna like beat the lab, like come up with something that was like, see, we didn't need to send it off to this thing.
Yeah, to the feds because we figured it out on our own.
Yeah, spoiler, none of that happens.
No, but they try. We go to Catherine with Jackie, who is the person running Prince this evening. And Catherine wants her to process the original trash bag and lets her know that, hey, we're in a race with the feds. Yeah. So, get this evidence before they get the evidence, I guess.
Yeah. I sort of spoiled this for myself, but it was such a weird interaction. Oh, Franco is back from days. And then it's like, oh, and they have an interaction. Oh, how's your daughter? We catch up again. Oh, you owe me a beer. I immediately was like, this is going to be like one of those CSI lab people that we're going to see a lot more of, isn't it? Like they really wanted you to have an introduction to this random new.
Yeah, they made her very personable very quickly.
Yeah. And then I was like looking on IMDb and it was like, I forget how many episodes it tells you. So I was like, I'm sure we'll see more of Franco in the future now. But it was not that there was anything wrong with the scene, but it was kind of funny. I was like, this is definitely not like a one-off.
Yeah, it's not a one.
They really wanted to introduce you to a character here.
Yeah, yeah.
And so a lot of this scene is sort of furthering that. I will say, I was like beside myself. This whole trash bag deposition thing. Oh, sounds like a really complicated thing. Later in the episode, they do it in about 8 seconds.
Yep.
And I was like, why didn't she just do it that time in 8 seconds?
I don't know.
Gotta pace the story out.
Gotta pace the story correctly. We return to Nick and Grissom. They're in the backyard. There have been signs of digging. They then go into the shed. They find a Glock. Sara appears at the doorway. She lets them know that he had no weapons on him. But as Grissom's continuing to walk around the shed, he finds some loose boards. They lift up the boards. There's additional guns. So
it's like an automatic Uzi.
Yeah. Come to find out, it's pretty intense what they find. But we leave this for a bit. We return to Catherine. She's at a coffee shop. She is approached by who we learn are the Roths, so the parents of the victim that Mathers is being executed for. But I did have to note that it's creepy and inappropriate that they found someone who knew her, that knows that she visits that coffee shop, and then they ambushed her.
And there's like a lot of people, like, why are you signaling a cap? You know what I mean? Like,
Right.
you have
A prosecution. You
yeah,
have
the attorney general
yeah.
became the other things. I also thought, like, as we learned through the episode, the Roth case is one of 3 cases
Yes.
that are connected. Those other parents don't. They probably also have a vested interest.
So they slipped this line into this episode.
Yes.
They only ever charged him
Sure.
with the Roth case.
Sure, but if you're
with the understanding
child,
that, like,
yeah, if your child was killed in the same style of, you know, I assume those parents are assuming that the same person is the killer of their child, and that he's in jail and he's under the death penalty, and that's part of their closure. And so that's why I was like, they make a big deal out of the Roth parents, but like, there's 2 other sets of parents out there who are being less creepy. I will say, for a quick second, I thought maybe Dad was the killer. He makes a really weird face at a weird time,
and you were like,
oh. I still thought it on the second watch through. I was like, no, he definitely does the thing that like made me think that.
Yeah, made you think it. Okay. Spoiler alert, it's not the dad.
Well, we don't know.
Well, that is true.
Well, I guess for that case, we do know.
Yes, for his daughter's case specifically.
Yes, we do get closure on that one case.
Yes.
But there's, spoiler alert, a cliffhanger at the end of this episode.
Bum, bum, bum. There is. So
that looks like
in order to get to that cliffhanger, we're with Catherine back on campus, and O'Reilly is there, and we learn that there's been a copycat killing. So there's been a killing that looks very, very similar to the 3 previous murders. Catherine is taking pictures of the scene. David's in the background. And as they're, again, I didn't note every single time this happened because it, as Nick pointed out, bordered on almost obscene. But as Catherine is taking pictures of the scene, they are cutting back and forth with like the DNA being processed at the federal facility. But we end up learning that Catherine pulled a bug casing as well as black fibers from the victim's hair. Warwick arrives. David is, able to take the body away. Grissom and Nick we're back with them, back in the backyard. Grissom's examining the guns. Nick is scanning the ground, and then he finds something like a weird density about 2.5 feet underneath the ground. So like, whoopsies.
You could see this X-ray on his screen pretty well.
Yeah.
I just want to say the thing they dig up is not what they show in that picture.
Oh no. There's it's unrelated. We'll get to another point that I have to like point out something, but we'll get there in a little bit. We're with David and Doc Robbins. They are unbagging the most recent victim. She is in rigor, so she's been dead for at least 12 hours, and Doc Robbins notes that she has blue paint on her hand.
So I didn't catch this the first time watching, but earlier on in the episode, when Catherine is looking at the photos of the Roth murder,
the paint,
you could
under
see
her.
the blue paint on their hands.
Yeah.
And so I was like, why is he making such a big deal of this blue paint? I was like, oh, well,
that's why.
It's just a random piece of evidence, I guess.
Yep.
And no, it was not random.
We return to Grissom and Nick, and as Nick pointed out, what you see on Nick's screen and what is found actually buried in the yard, not the same thing, but what is found buried in the yard is a dog. So they can get him with like improper disposal of a pet, but it's not a human body. It's like very obviously a dog. Then Jim Brass is with the father, and man, does this guy hate his daughter.
Resents
her. Yeah, like, oh, she thinks I owe her, and she's stuck up, and just a prime example of a personality that should not have children.
Yeah.
Because if you do have children, you do owe them. You brought them into this world. So, and they do need things.
Yeah, you made that
crazy enough. Like, children have needs, and it is upon you to meet said needs. So, but we learn from him that his daughter has a blue V&W convertible, and we pan over to Grissom and Sara like watching this interrogation, And this is where we learn that the blood on the shirt is his own. So it could very well, he got into a fight, and then he bled on his own shirt. And the amount of blood that was on the towel, it is the daughter's, but it's like not a substantial, it's like, it's probably from like, oh, she
cut herself shaving
or something along, it was inconsequential. So
certainly not enough to get a warrant or do anything.
No.
Charged him with a crime. Yeah.
We have our third walk and talk with O'Reilly, Grissom, and Sara. And this is where we learn that the victim on the campus is Debbie Reston, the missing daughter. So
I'll be honest.
Cases connected.
I actually didn't.
You didn't get this.
I heard what he said. I didn't connect that right away the first time. And then I was like, wait, hold on. Is this the same person?
Yeah.
I was like, I just didn't catch. I think
they said her name very quickly before this. Like, they didn't really harp on what
I thought he was just giving, like, oh, we know the victim's name. Her name is Debbie Reston.
Yeah, and you're like, okay,
what does that mean? Nothing yet. We'll find out later.
Doodle-doo.
And no. And then I was like, wait, what's going on? And then I watched it the second time and I went, wow, I really missed that. It was really obvious. Like, I just wasn't paying attention.
Hey, it happens to the best of us. So
I even wrote down Mr. Reston under my spot, the guest star, just so.
Oh, nice! Just so you could.
Like, I had heard his name.
Yeah.
Written it down, and I still missed it.
Yeah, it's okay. Again, it happens. We're with Catherine and Grissom. They're with Doc Robbins. We learned that Debbie was taking a night course, and Catherine wants to know, like, hey, what is the difference between this victim and the other three victims? And Doc Robbins is saying that at this point, the only thing that he can really say is different is that she has defensive wounds. Like, her hands have defensive wounds, and like none of the other victims had defensive wounds.
There's two like key pieces of evidence here. So she's got glass in her hand.
Yep.
And then but also that the paint
is still wet.
Came first. Yeah, that's true as well. And so that the glass is embedded in her hand. So she got the paint on her hand first.
Yeah.
Then got glass. The defensive wounds.
Yeah.
Which is, whereas like if you had like taken someone out, knocked them unconscious, and then we're putting paint on their hand as like a calling card.
Yes.
It wouldn't make sense for her to have the defensive wounds after. So like the order of operations start to make you think there's something else going on with this paint.
Yeah. And as we both mentioned, the paint is still wet 12 hours later, which is very strange. Like, what paint would not have dried in at least 12 hours. Catherine just keeps getting approached by people. So this woman, our earlier spot, the guest star, comes over to talk to Catherine. She's, kind of asking about this new case. She doesn't really introduce herself, but through the context of the conversation, we realize that she's John Mather's attorney. Like, she's representing him.
More importantly, we got our fourth walk and talk because she gets up from the table and walks.
And they walk. So we have our fourth walk and talk between these two. And Catherine correctly is saying, like, I can't tell you anything about this current case. Like, it's an open case. I can't give you any information. Like, you know that. And the attorney is using this as like, the killer is still out there, and obviously you have the wrong guy, and this DNA is going to, like, prove that you have the wrong guy, et cetera, et cetera.
Basically, you're going to run other suspects' DNA through the same testing, right?
Yeah. So, well, the thing was that they couldn't run DNA
originally
when the case was originally done, and now the attorney is saying, like, now that we can, that DNA is going to exonerate my client.
So this is interesting because at this point, the first time watching through, I'm thinking, oh, the attorney really believes the person's innocent. I think you're supposed to think of it that way.
Yeah, I don't think she's supposed to be like a swarmy attorney.
No.
I think you're supposed to think like she truly believes that her client is innocent, and she really thinks that this new technology is going to prove that he's innocent. So
she's presuming that he'll be exonerated.
Yes.
Then they'll find some suspect for this new murder and check his DNA.
Yeah. And it'll match the other three.
It'll match, and then it'll completely exonerate him.
Yeah.
And he'll be able to get out of jail and go home free.
Yeah.
Spoiler, that does not happen.
It does not happen, but we'll find out why in a little while. Before we do, Warwick and Sara are processing Debbie's car. It's very, very clean, so they don't think that the attack or the murder happened like inside of her car. We do learn that she was taking Econ 101, which, according to Warwick, because I guess this is where he went to school, long walk from where her car is parked, but like, don't worry, he'll lead the way. So they go to walk to where like the Econ building still is.
Well,
I guess they've made no changes.
Here's the thing. I'm more than 15, almost 20 years out of college. If I was on the campus of my college and you were like, oh, so-and-so is taking business law, I'd be like, oh, it's in that building still, right?
Yeah.
Or like, it's like the science, there are like science buildings and math buildings and whatever. And so like, I was like, at first I was like, you're just going to assume everyone's class is in the same places it was before. But like, the reality is, I think I would make that same assumption.
Yeah.
And I think the odds are probably decent.
Yeah, pretty good.
Like, it's not guaranteed for sure.
No.
But like the second watch there, I was kind of like, actually, you know what? I would do the same thing. I'd be like, oh yeah, I went here. Yeah, it's probably, I know where that is. Let's walk over that way. Because they always do that, sort of trace the path when they can.
Yeah. Yeah. So as they're walking from where her car is parked to the building that they think...
do talk to each other. Does this count?
Oh, yeah, I guess this is technically a walk. It's an outside walk.
Prior to Warwick's slip, they are walking and talking.
Yeah, they are walking and talking. So this would be what, fifth?
Fifth, yeah. Jeez. According to my dice, I'm counting up with little dice.
Perfect. So as they're walking and talking, Warwick touches a railing. He ends up getting paint on his hand. And this leads to, well, a few revelations. A, this is probably where the wet paint came from. But then also, what would be the first thing that you do if you got paint on your hands and they look over to a little water fountain bubbler and are like, oh, you would go and wash your hands. Like, that's what your first stop would be. He
goes through these motions, right? So he like trips, he grabs the railing, he gets paint on his hand, and then he's like, oh, and he's kind of like, what am I going to do with this paint? He looks around and he sees a water fountain and he thinks, I think you're supposed to assume he's thinking, oh, I should go wash it off. And then he stops and goes, hey, what do you think the first thing you would do? Go over here. And then I think they cut here, or they don't actually go.
No, they don't cut. They end up going over to the fountain, and we realize that there's a broken bulb. Over.
Then, like 2 other people show up. They're just sort of.
Yeah, they're just there. Like we're supposed to realize that some time has passed.
I didn't know if there was a scene in between.
There's not. Okay. It's a weird cut. But we learned that there's a broken bulb.
3 more seconds in the lab.
They could have. But they did not. And the team is talking, and they're trying to figure out, like, how did the copycat know about the paint?
Yeah.
Like, how did he, like, know about the paint? Like, other things, yeah, like, that the body was, like, found in a trash bag and that it was bound with zip ties. Like, that stuff is stuff that makes it into the press. But, like, how would they have known about the paint? We then have Warwick finding Debbie's backpack. Catherine and Grissom are then... Well, Catherine's over by a tree. Grissom goes to join her. We learn that the bug casing found was a cicada. We get a nice little bug lesson from Grissom on cicadas, which I'm not going to repeat. If you watch the episode or, go to Google and search cicadas.
Or if you've been on the internet anytime in the last 2 years.
Yes. You'll get... Mania. But I do want to point out one thing about this scene, is that the CGI is so bad. The cicada, crawling up the tree.
It's not great.
And then morphing.
I'm just used to it by now, I guess.
Ooh, I don't know. For some reason, this really stood out to me. I was like,
it's not good. I'm not
I was like, this is rough.
This is about 2002 era CGI.
Yeah. We have another cutscene of DNA being sequenced in the federal lab. We then have Warwick and Grissom kind of like recreating the attack. Like, Warwick's where the killer was probably hiding, Grissom's at the fountain, and he's positioning himself in a certain way because of where the defensive wounds were. And
I thought it was weird that Grissom touches the fountain and they didn't like fingerprint it to see if the...
I think the idea is that, like, hopefully they already did that, but maybe. I don't know. Maybe not. We don't know. Yeah. We'll never know. But during this exchange, Catherine finds polarized glass, which is strange because, like, the light bulb over the fountain is not going to be polarized. That doesn't make any sense. And this is where they kind of reiterate, like, oh, she's a black belt. She fought back. Part of this, where this glass came from, is because she fought back. We stay with Catherine. She is with Jackie. She's not able to lift any prints from the trash bag from 15 years ago, but Catherine has a new bag. And, hey, can you print this? And as Nick mentioned earlier, magically she can print this in about 8 seconds and finds a partial print.
Yeah, she just like walks over, throws it in, hits a button, and
Beep.
in a couple seconds they're done.
Yep. So we get a partial print there. Sara, Nick, and Warwick are in the lab. We learn that the fiber found on the victim is like car upholstery. It's just from a generic Chevy, and that the polarized glass is from eyeglasses belonging to someone that needs a 20/80 correction.
So I do not have glasses.
I do not either.
Don't. My understanding is the way that the numbers in vision work is like the first number is 20, the second number is what somebody with 20/20 vision can see from the distance that you can see away. So it's like a ratio.
Mhm.
So like someone with 20/20 vision can see something 80 feet away that somebody who has 20/80 vision would look the same to them if they were 20 feet away or something like that.
Okay.
Like maybe that's not the exact ratio.
Yeah.
But it works as something like that's like only slightly worse than my vision. And I was like, that sounds like really bad vision.
It sounds like really bad vision, but they're making it sound like it's a very minor correction.
It's not, I guess it's not that bad.
Okay.
But I think it's just sort of normal people who need glasses.
Okay.
Isn't it important because I was perplexed by this because I was trying to figure out how good or bad it was. Because later on, someone is looking at a pair of glasses and judging someone's vision as a way to estimate if they might be a suspect.
Yeah. No, I have 20/20 vision and mild astigmatism. So that's about all I got. We then go to Greg Sanders. He's running over to Catherine. He got the report back from the feds. He thinks Catherine's not going to mind that he took a look. She does. She minds. This is her case. What is Greg Sanders doing? But we learn that all of the hairs collected from the Roth case are Mathers. So Mathers definitely killed, well, at least according to the hair DNA.
Yep.
Charlene Roth.
We don't get another scene with the district attorney.
No.
Not really.
No.
Maybe she's in the execution room later. I don't remember.
I don't remember either.
But
I don't. Yeah.
It's like I wanted like an end to that story or something.
We don't really get one. But instead, Catherine walks into where Grissom is. He is letting her know that the paint is an oil-based blue, but it was also mixed with motor oil, and that's why it's still wet so long afterwards. Which, the oil-based blue has uses on canvas, but there's no use for mixing it with motor oil other than to not have it dry.
Yeah.
Like there's no like sound reason that this paint would be mixed with motor oil.
It's like a paint thinner that isn't going to dry. It's
essentially.
Evaporative oil in the paint with something that isn't going to evaporate.
Yeah.
Very quickly, at least.
And as he is examining this paint, he finds a hair that he is hoping is from a paintbrush. This brings us to Catherine and Grissom with someone from the art department. We never really learn who this person is, but they're saying hey, I've only been here a couple of years or so. He wasn't here. He wasn't there when the original murders happened.
You know what he says? He says, I've been here since 1995 or since 95. And in my head I went, oh, he's been there a long time.
Because you're doing it to today.
Yeah, I was like, that's 30 years. This guy barely even looks like he's been a professor for 30 years.
It's 7 years ago in this time, 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, it's like 7 years.
Yeah.
Years ago, I went, oh, wait, okay.
But we learn that the hair from the paintbrush was badger hair and nylon. But
two different hairs, I think.
There's two different hairs. One of them was badger hair, and then the other one was nylon. And this art teacher is saying, you would never use nylon with oil. That's you would never do that. That doesn't make any sense. But I guess you can get this badger hair paintbrush everywhere.
I assume
the
this
student union has it. Yeah. He's
brush.
Just saying it's very common. That's basically another clue that's not going to really help you narrow down who it is. It's not
for all the
the ever elusive badger hairbrush. It's a pretty common thing.
It sounds like it would be exotic, but it's not.
It's not.
For all the over explaining the show tends to do sometimes, I think they do a really poor job here of, I think what they're trying to imply is that somebody used probably a nylon brush at some point, right? And that nylon brush is prone to shedding its hairs.
Yes.
And that hair got into the paint and contaminated it.
Yes.
This time around, it is likely they used a badger brush, or I guess it could have been flipped the other way around.
Yeah,
I
it
don't
could have been
know.
flipped the other way around.
And they picked it up. So it's like not just that they have like different brushes, or the brushes are not common, or they would never mix and match or use this brush with that thing, but also that like this paint is being reused after some period of time, possibly. So if you were just trying to do a copycat killer and you went out and you bought fresh paint to try to match the paint, you wouldn't only have one type of brush in it, probably.
Right.
You might have two types of brush, and you might not have an artisty brush or something. And so, yeah, so that's the point that largely I think that they should be making, and they don't really like drive it home. Like normally they'd have a scene like, oh well, the art teacher said that there are two brushes and you wouldn't have, and so that means well, you know what I mean, we do that a lot, and I feel like this is one of those times where they should have done that and they didn't.
They did not. Instead, we're back at the lab. Greg Sanders approaches Grissom and Catherine. We learn that the hair collected at the most recent crime matches Janet Kent, who is the first victim.
Yes.
From thus,
X number of years ago.
Yeah, so 17, at least, 15 years ago was Charlene Roth, and this was before Charlene Roth. So the idea is possibly longer. But this is where we get really the official confirmation that Mathers is in fact the copycat.
Yeah, they say something like, "Oh, Mathers is the copycat killer."
Yeah.
And that's he's sloppy, and they caught him, and then they assumed he did the other murders, and so.
But he is in fact the copycat, and the original and more prolific killer is still out there. We have a scene with Grissom. He is looking at different paint samples, and at the end we realize that like all of the paint samples match except for Charlene Roth's case, meaning that the case that they know that Mathers was the killer, the paint doesn't match, but otherwise the paint matches,
including the new one.
Yes. So there's four paint samples.
Time has passed.
Yeah, there's 4 paint samples. 3 of the 4 match. The only one that does not match is the Mathers, the one that Mathers is responsible for. And yeah, as Nick is saying, like even regardless of a 15+ year gap.
And more importantly, this isn't like the most famous core or whatever, like Behr paint color of all time or something, where they're just making it exactly to the same specification. The only way this would be happening is if you were literally using the same paint can.
Yeah. What would be the chances there? We have our 6th walk and talk.
Yep.
With Catherine and Grissom. We learn that the execution is back on for Mathers. The Roths have invited Catherine to sit with them for this. She walks off, and we're to imagine that she's off to go to the execution.
Like, why are you doing this? He's like, I just have to. Okay.
Yeah, like it's just a thing I got to do.
That's what normal people do when in these situations.
Yeah, and Sara walks up, and she's letting Grissom know that the dean came up with a name.
Does this count as a second walk and talk? Actually, they don't walk. I think they don't.
I think they just kind of And so the dean came up with a name, Cody Lewis, who was like a grad student, or he's either a grad student or a student at the time
of the original
murders, and now he has like just returned as a teacher
from out of town, basically.
Yeah, at the college. So we're with Jim Brass and Cody in interrogation, and Jim Brass is laying into him about the fact that he likes to paint dead girls, because they have examples of like paintings that he has
made. A painting, of like one of the original murderers.
Yeah. And we learned that he knew her, like they went on a date, and so not only does he have a very creepy painting, but he also has a direct connection to her. And Jim Brass is trying to hint like, ooh, are you one of those guys that can't take rejection?
Yeah.
And he's trying to play it off and like, no, that's, I just paint and like, it just affected me, and, I'm fine, and yada, yada. So we pan away from that for a bit. We're with Sick and Era.
Sick and Era.
Yeah, I combined Sara and Nick into one. That's their couple name. No, we go to Sara and Nick. They're processing a car. It is a Chevy that has
a black interior.
but it's very clean and it's very generic. So they're
I
just like, I
I
don't know how this
couldn't
is gonna help.
I couldn't really understand if with the way. So Sarah says nobody could get a car this clean. If the implication was it's so clean that it's clearly been cleaned, or it's so clean that like I don't think this person could have done it because they would have left something behind.
I think the first one maybe, but I'm not.
Yeah.
They don't really.
Answer that
They
question.
don't really answer that question.
Yeah. It was. I feel like I assumed it was the first way, and then especially when I watched it the second time, I was like, "That's not actually what she's saying. She's really kind of saying it the second way." But and then they don't. Again, they don't come back to it. They don't use it as a piece of evidence. They don't
No.
use it to say like, oh yeah, there's something up with this guy's car. He's cleaned it. This is old like 70s car.
Yeah, it is like a
He's
very
cleaned
old
it,
car.
and so. But I actually think that, and again, we don't get an answer to this. It's possible he transported the body in a different vehicle, and the fiber came off of him, and so therefore the body was never in that car.
Yeah.
But like we don't actually follow that thread at all in this episode.
We do not in this episode. Instead, we return to Jackie. She's questioning why this guy would like give up his car, give up his DNA, give up his prints if he's guilty.
Yes.
She's kind of leaning towards like, I don't see why he would just like easily give all this stuff up if he's guilty.
I think it's weird they never find out what his prescription is. If he has 80/20.
Yeah, they don't. I mean, he's wearing glasses, but
Yeah.
that's as far as we get when it comes to that. And we learn in the scene that his prints do not match the partial print that was pulled off the trash bag.
Sure. But like that doesn't mean anything.
No, not necessarily.
Right. We're making an assumption that no one's ever touched his trash bag before.
Yeah. No one touches trash bag.
Could have just been on a janitor's cart, and then he put gloves on, took it off, and was hoping there was a partial print on it that isn't his.
Yeah. But we cut away to Catherine witnessing the execution, and I will say that I think the actor here, she does a really good job in this series of scenes. Yeah. Like they kind of pan between the execution and Catherine Willows and like really show it. And she's saying a lot with her face without being over the top about it, which I think can be difficult to do. So I want to point out that I think she did a really good job in this series of scenes. We are then back with Jim Brass with Grissom. They're just hanging out, talking the case, and they're basically saying like,
office, basically, right?
Yeah, they're talking about how the murderer must have ties to the campus. He must have blended right in, and they're both like, he's gonna kill again. Like they're both what are you gonna do? He's gonna.
Well, that's also like the only reason there is a gap is because he was in jail or he moved away. Right. Like how did he? And that's true. Like if this person moved away, then like they were probably killing people elsewhere.
Possibly.
I will say the actor who plays Cody Lewis does appear to be in 2 episodes of CSI, according to his IMDb. So I'm hoping that we may have a return, maybe later this season.
We have a return to the storyline. I wouldn't be shocked. I wouldn't be shocked if it's this season. I don't think they made us wait super long. I don't think, but I don't remember either. So I thought this all happened
seasons later.
To be fair, I thought this all happened in one episode, and then I was watching this episode. I was like, "There's no way that they can fit," because I know, I'm like thinking to the other episode.
The rest of the story.
Yeah, yes, and I was like, in my head, I was like, "How are they going to fit like everything that still happens?" So
probably this season then.
It's probably this season
because it seems like they've planned it, right? It seems like they've been like, there's this news thread and all this stuff that I sort of like poking at, like how come they didn't talk about this or all this stuff, like this would be evidence. They're kind of setting themselves up for a 2-parter. I think Grissom's great line at the end of this episode.
Yeah, so humility.
Yeah,
I feel like So I feel like Jim Brass and Grissom both have like interesting lines here. Jim Brass is talking about how sometimes it's better to be lucky than good.
Yes.
And Jim Brass is saying like, hopefully next time we can get lucky. And this leads Grissom to be like, oh, I don't believe in luck and blah blah blah. And then I just have to be smarter than the criminals. And then he's like, but I'm worried in this case that the guy might be smarter than me. End of episode.
It's Paul Melander.
It's Paul Melander all over again. It's not Paul
Yeah, it
Melander.
fades to black.
This time, spoiler alert.
Final
It's not.
style.
It's not Paul Melander this time.
God damn it.
But Nick, what did you think about today's episode?
It was pretty good. It was pretty easy to rewatch too. I hemmed and hawed over what score to give it. I could have given this episode anywhere between 3 and 4. I feel like it ruined its chance to have a 4 with the 37 billion seconds of the DNA lab, and it's just like I felt like there were things that frustrated me the first time I watched the episode.
Yeah.
The second time I watched the episode, I already knew what the deal was. They weren't really that big. They were just frustrating because as I'm trying to like feel out the episode and understand the mystery, like I already know what's going to matter and not going to matter, so it doesn't matter. So I kind of went from giving it a 3, and on the second rewatch, I gave it up to a 3.5. And I feel like because it just is okay enough. And I think this is probably the floor for me saying an episode is rewatchable. Should be a rewatch. So, but I didn't give the rewatch because I just felt like it was pretty easy to watch the second time. Like I enjoyed watching it.
Yeah.
Even though I knew exactly what was happening. And there was like, I watched the first episode kind of early. So I had like several days between watchings. And so I didn't remember everything in crisp detail. And so I still enjoyed watching it. So yeah, I think it's definitely a rewatch, but just by the skin of its teeth.
Yeah. For me, I think the true score, I will give this one a score because I'm not going to cheap out, but I think the true score will be once we see the other part of this, because I think I'm only going to give this a 3, but it's because like part of that is like watching this episode, expecting certain things to happen that happen in the second part of it, and then them not happening, and then me being like, oh, what? And like, oh, like, but that I feel bad like not giving it the best rating because of that, because that's not the episode's fault. It's more just like how many times I've watched it. But I want to be honest about how I feel about it. So I think the second part of it I will have a higher rating. But I will say, for same thing to you, I think I would do rewatch. I think it was an easy rewatch. It was.
Yeah, I almost gave it a 3 with a rewatch, and I was just kind of like, if I'm going to say I'm going to rewatch it, then I got to go a little higher. I feel like that has to be my floor.
That's fair.
And it can't be that bad. There's still a lot of room for improvement. There's 4, there's 4.5, there's 5.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so like I'm definitely in agreement. It's if there was a quarter, I might be at 3.25. But I don't really want to go into the quarter stars category.
That's fair. I mean, we could get a little obnoxious with our scoring if we get a little too in the weeds with it. So, all right, so 3.5 to 3. I mean, I think that's a respectable showing, especially for an episode that at the end of it doesn't have a resolution.
And we've had, I think, way too many unresolving cases. Where someone either just dies or we don't know who the killer is. But I feel like recently it just keeps coming up. I think there was one where like I was like, basically they didn't solve either of these cases.
Well, I mean, they solved the missing person because they found her.
I mean, there was an episode where this season.
Okay.
I feel like they didn't.
I thought you meant this specific one. I was like, well, technically they solved the missing person, not in like the way you want to solve a missing person, but they technically solved the missing person.
The magician episode we just watched.
Yeah, that's true. There was, there was a lot hinted at, but there was no, and like we had an arrest made, but yeah.
But they don't really even have a lot of evidence.
No.
And that's what I mean. Like, there's been a lot of that kind of stuff this season. So it is like a weird taste. I want them to be successful.
I hear you.
Nick could be a CSI level 4 by now.
I know.
They have more of these cases solved.
Well, we'll see in our next episode if Nick progresses in his career or not when we return with season 3, episode 7, Fight Night. In the meantime, you can support us on Patreon by searching Fight Night.
Oh, like boxing?
Yes.
Boxing related? I actually misheard you. You said Fright Night both times.
Ooh.
And then I said Fight Night back, and I was like,
it's because I invited you to my Halloween party. It's because I invited you to my Halloween party earlier today.
Oh yeah.
I plan early for Halloween, everyone. So no, Fight Night, not Fright Night. But in the meantime, support us on Patreon. You can find us by searching for Who Are You Calling a CSI Podcast. You can also find us on Facebook in the same manner. We're also on Twitter/X and Instagram at Who Are You CSI Pod. And we have a website. You can check us out at whoareyouscipod.com. But otherwise, we'll talk to you next week.
No spoilers.
No spoilers.